I was sitting in my Uncle Howard's lawyer's office when I found out I'd inherited something worth more than the run-down fishing cabin I'd expected. The attorney, a gray-haired man named Mr. Patterson, slid a document across his mahogany desk and cleared his throat. Your uncle also owned the mineral rights to approximately 47 acres in Collin County, Texas. The surface rights belong to a residential development called Willow Creek Estates, but the subsurface mineral rights are yours, completely separate ownership. I stared at the paper, trying to process what he'd just said. Wait, so there's a neighborhood sitting on top of land I own underneath? Technically, yes. It's called a split estate. The homeowners association and residents own the surface, but you own everything below. Oil, gas, minerals, the works. Mr. Patterson leaned back in his chair. And there's more. A petroleum company called Titan Energy has been trying to contact your uncle for 2 years. They want to drill. I took the liberty of reviewing their offer. It's substantial. My hands felt cold. I'd moved to Dallas 3 months ago for a software engineering job, living in a cramped apartment in Plano. The idea that I suddenly owned something valuable underneath an entire neighborhood seemed surreal. How substantial? Their initial offer is $200,000 for the lease, plus 18% royalties on everything they extract. Based on geological surveys, we're talking about potential earnings in the millions over the next decade. I left that office in a daze, clutching a folder full of documents I barely understood. The inheritance included maps, old deeds from the 1950s, and a recent letter from Titan Energy requesting a meeting. My Uncle Howard had been a wildcatter back in the day, buying up mineral rights across Texas, before retiring to that cabin in Louisiana. I'd only met him twice as a kid, remembered him as a quiet man who smelled like cigar smoke and talked about rock formations like they were old friends. The next morning, I called Titan Energy. A woman named Jennifer scheduled a meeting for that afternoon at their offices in downtown Dallas. I showed up in my best suit, which wasn't saying much, and was ushered into a conference room with 3 executives who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate catalog. Mr. Young, thank you for coming, the lead executive said, extending his hand. His name was Richard Kowalski, according to his business card. We've been hoping to speak with your uncle for quite some time. Our condolences on your loss. Thank you, I managed. Your letter said you want to drill in Willow Creek Estates. That's correct. We've done extensive surveys. There's a significant natural gas deposit beneath that development. With your permission, we'd like to begin operations within 60 days. We've already secured all necessary permits from the state. We just need your signature as the mineral rights holder. The next 2 hours were a blur of technical explanations, maps covered in colored zones, and financial projections. They were professionals, and they were hungry for this deal. By the end, I'd negotiated them up to $250,000 for the signing bonus and 20% royalties. My hands shook as I signed the papers. One thing you should know, Richard said as we wrapped up. The HOA at Willow Creek Estates isn't aware of the split estate situation. Most of the residents probably don't know either. These situations can get contentious. We'll handle all the legal notifications, but you might want to prepare yourself for some pushback. I should have paid more attention to that warning. The drilling was scheduled to begin in exactly 31 days. Titan Energy sent certified letters to every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates, explaining that drilling operations would commence on the property due to privately held mineral rights. They also sent a letter to the HOA board, outlining their legal obligations and the protections afforded to mineral rights holders under Texas law. I didn't hear anything for a week. Then my phone rang at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Derek Young?" a woman's voice demanded before I could even say hello properly. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Karen Stromberg, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. We need to talk immediately about this drilling nonsense." I sat up in bed, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "It's not nonsense. I own the mineral rights under your neighborhood and I've leased them to Titan Energy. It's all legal." "Legal?" Her voice rose an octave. "You can't just drill for oil in the middle of a residential neighborhood. We have property values to protect, children playing in yards, families who paid good money for peaceful homes. This is absolutely unacceptable." "Madam, I understand your concern, but Texas law is very clear about mineral rights. They take precedence over surface rights. Titan Energy has all the proper permits." "We'll see about that," she snapped. "The HOA board is meeting tonight at 7. You need to be there. Willow Creek Estates Community Center, and don't be late." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, feeling the first real tremor of anxiety about what I'd gotten myself into. I called Jennifer at Titan Energy, who connected me with their legal team. A lawyer named Marcus Brennan assured me that everything was airtight, but suggested I attend the meeting with him present. That evening, I drove out to Willow Creek Estates for the first time. The neighborhood was exactly what I'd expected. Neat rows of two-story houses with manicured lawns, Bradford pear trees lining the streets, and a community center that looked like it had been built in the early 2000s. There were already 30 cars in the parking lot when Marcus and I arrived. The community center's main room was packed. Every folding chair was occupied, and people lined the walls. I spotted Karen Stromberg immediately. A woman in her late 40s with highlighted blonde hair and a blazer that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." She stood at the front next to a table where 4 other board members sat, all looking equally displeased. The room went quiet when Marcus and I entered. Dozens of pairs of eyes tracked our movement to 2 empty chairs someone had placed in front of the board table, like we were about to be put on trial. Karen called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of a gavel. "Good evening, everyone. As you all know, we're here to discuss the outrageous situation that's been thrust upon our community. This man," she pointed at me like I'd committed a crime, "claims he has the right to allow oil drilling in our neighborhood." "It's not a claim," Marcus said calmly, standing up. "I'm Marcus Brennan, legal counsel for Titan Energy. Mr. Young is the legal owner of the mineral rights under this property, rights that were severed from the surface estate in 1957. This is a matter of public record, documented in the Collin County deed records. Texas property law is explicit. Mineral rights are dominant over surface rights." A man in the front row jumped up. "That's insane. We own our homes, we pay HOA fees, we maintain this neighborhood. You can't just drill here." "Actually, under Texas law we can," Marcus continued. "However, Titan Energy is committed to being a good neighbor. We'll be using directional drilling technology, which means the actual drilling pad will be located on the undeveloped lot at the northern edge of the neighborhood. We'll drill down and then horizontally under the residential area. The surface disruption will be minimal." "Minimal," Karen's voice dripped with sarcasm. "There will be trucks, noise, industrial equipment in our neighborhood. Property values will plummet. This is a residential community governed by strict HOA regulations. We have covenants that prohibit industrial activity." "Your covenants apply to surface use only," Marcus replied. "They have no bearing on mineral rights, which existed before your HOA was even formed. The state of Texas has already approved all necessary permits. This is happening whether you like it or not. The room erupted. People were shouting over each other, some demanding to know how this could be legal, others threatening lawsuits. Karen banged her gavel repeatedly, but it took several minutes for order to be restored. I stood up, my heart hammering. Look, I understand you're upset. I didn't ask for this situation. I inherited these rights from my uncle, but this is an opportunity that could change my life. The law is on my side and I'm not backing down. Then we'll fight you in court, Karen declared. The HOA has a legal fund specifically for situations like this. We'll tie you up in litigation for years. Marcus shook his head. You'd be wasting your money. Texas courts have consistently upheld mineral rights supremacy. You won't win. Another board member, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up. What about compensation? If our property values decrease because of this, who pays for that? There's no legal obligation for compensation in a split estate situation, Marcus said. However, Titan Energy is willing to discuss a community benefit package. We've done this in other neighborhoods, things like road improvements, noise mitigation, even direct payments to affected homeowners. Karen crossed her arms. We don't want your blood money. We want you to stop this drilling. That's not going to happen, I said, finding my voice stronger now. The drilling starts in 24 days. I came here tonight as a courtesy to let you know that Titan Energy will do everything possible to minimize disruption. But this is happening. We left shortly after, escorted to our cars by an angry crowd that shouted questions and accusations. Someone called me a greedy bastard. A woman said I was ruining her children's future. I drove back to my apartment with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Over the next week, things escalated. The HOA hired a law firm out of Houston and filed an injunction to halt the drilling. Marcus had predicted this, and Titan Energy's legal team filed an immediate response. A hearing was scheduled for 3 days before drilling was set to begin. Meanwhile, Karen Stromberg launched a full-scale campaign against me. She created a Facebook group called Save Willow Creek Estates that gained 300 members in 48 hours. They posted articles about oil drilling disasters, pollution statistics, and photos of industrial sites that looked nothing like what Titan Energy had planned. Someone found my LinkedIn profile and posted it with the caption, "This is the man destroying our neighborhood." I started getting threatening emails. Nothing explicitly violent, but messages telling me I'd regret this, that karma would catch up to me, that I was a monster. I had to make my social media accounts private after people started leaving hostile comments on posts from years ago. My boss called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. "Derek, I need to ask if you're involved in some kind of legal situation. Someone called the company claiming you're engaged in activities that could damage our reputation." I explained the entire situation, feeling like I was defending myself against accusations I didn't deserve. My boss listened and ultimately said he couldn't see how my personal property rights affected my job performance, but suggested I keep him informed if things got worse. They got worse. The following Monday, 19 days before drilling was scheduled to start, I received a certified letter from the Willow Creek Estates HOA. It was a bill for $17,000. According to the letter, I was in violation of multiple HOA covenants and was being fined accordingly. The violations included planning unapproved modifications to community property, engaging in activities detrimental to neighborhood character, and disturbing the peace of residents through threatening industrial activity. I called Marcus immediately. "This is extortion," he said after I read him the letter. "You don't even own property in that HOA. You can't be subject to their covenants. Ignore it. They're claiming that since the mineral rights are connected to the property, I fall under their jurisdiction. That's not how any of this works. They're desperate. The hearing is in 2 days. Just sit tight. The hearing took place in the Collin County Courthouse on a Wednesday morning. I took the day off work and met Marcus and the Titan Energy legal team outside the courtroom. Inside, the HOA had brought their entire board, their lawyer, and about 20 residents who filled the gallery. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Nguyen, listened to both sides present their arguments. The HOA's lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit, argued that the covenants and restrictions of the neighborhood should be considered when granting permits for industrial activity. He talked about quality of life, safety concerns, and the reasonable expectations of homeowners who'd purchased property in a residential development. Marcus countered with a century of Texas case law. He cited Supreme Court decisions, state statutes, and precedents that made it abundantly clear. Mineral rights are property rights, and they supersede surface considerations. He presented the original deed from 1957 that severed the mineral rights, showed the chain of ownership leading to my uncle and then to me, and demonstrated that every permit and regulation had been followed to the letter. Judge Nguyen took less than 15 minutes to deliberate. "The law in this matter is clear," she said. "Mineral rights in Texas are a dominant estate. The HOA's covenants, however well-intentioned, cannot override state law and legally held property rights. The injunction is denied. Mr. Young and Titan Energy may proceed with their drilling operations as planned." Karen Stromberg stood up in the gallery. "This is a travesty. Your Honor, you're allowing corporate greed to destroy a family neighborhood." "Madam, sit down," Judge Nguyen said sharply. "I don't make the laws, I interpret them. If you have an issue with Texas mineral rights law, take it up with your state representatives. This hearing is adjourned. We won, but it didn't feel like a victory." As we left the courthouse, reporters from local news stations were waiting. Apparently, the story of oil drilling in a suburban HOA neighborhood made for good television. I declined to comment and hurried to my car, but that evening, I saw myself on the Channel 5 News. They'd used my LinkedIn photo and described me as the out-of-state inheritor whose decision to allow drilling has divided a peaceful Collin County community. The segment included interviews with Willow Creek residents. A young mother holding a toddler said she was terrified of what chemicals might leach into their groundwater. An elderly man said he'd lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and never imagined he'd have to deal with oil trucks driving past his house. Karen Stromberg got a full 30 seconds to talk about how the system was rigged against ordinary homeowners trying to protect their families. They didn't interview anyone who might have presented the facts, didn't mention that modern drilling operations are heavily regulated, didn't explain that the actual drilling pad would be on the edge of the neighborhood on vacant land. It was all emotion and fear. Drilling was now 12 days away. Titan Energy began moving equipment to the site. They'd purchased the undeveloped lot at the northern boundary of Willow Creek Estates, a 3-acre parcel that had been for sale for years. It was far enough from the nearest house that noise would be manageable, but you could definitely see it from several streets in the neighborhood. I drove out there one evening to watch the setup. Large trucks were delivering metal containers that would serve as offices, and workers were leveling the ground for the drilling pad. A chain-link fence with privacy screening was going up around the perimeter. It looked professional and organized, nothing like the industrial hellscape the HOA's Facebook group was portraying. A security guard stopped me at the entrance. "You can't be here, sir. This is a restricted work site." "I'm Derek Young, the mineral rights owner." His expression changed immediately. "Oh, Mr. Young, sorry. Let me call the site supervisor." A woman in a hard hat and high-visibility vest walked over 5 minutes later. She introduced herself as Patricia Lopez, the drilling operations manager. "Good to finally meet you," she said, shaking my hand. "Want a tour?" She walked me around the site, explaining the setup. The actual drill rig wouldn't arrive until 3 days before operations began. They were using a modern, relatively quiet system that could drill to 10,000 feet and then angle horizontally for another 2 miles. The target formation was a shale layer rich in natural gas. "We'll be drilling 24 hours a day once we start," Patricia explained. "But we've installed sound barriers, and the loudest phase only lasts about a week. After that, it's just maintenance and monitoring. Most people won't even know we're here." "Try telling that to the HOA," I said. She gave me a sympathetic look. "Yeah, I saw the news coverage." For what it's worth, we've done this in dozens of neighborhoods. The horror stories you hear are mostly from old operations with outdated technology. Modern drilling is a different world. We take environmental protection seriously. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her because there was no turning back now. 6 days before drilling was set to begin, I got a call from an unknown number at 9 p.m. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another hostile resident, but something made me pick up. "Derek Young?" a man's voice asked. "Yes." "My name is Robert Chen. I'm a homeowner in Willow Creek Estates. I was at the HOA meeting. Listen, I know you're getting a lot of heat, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in the neighborhood is against this." I sat down, surprised. Really? Look, I understand property rights. I'm a commercial real estate attorney. What you're doing is completely legal, and frankly, the HOA is wasting everyone's money with this fight. Karen Stromberg has gotten the board to authorize spending up to $50,000 on legal fees. It's insane. I had no idea they were spending that much. Most residents don't either. She's been making decisions without proper votes, claiming emergency authority as board president. Some of us are getting concerned about how she's handling this whole situation. I just wanted you to know that you're not the villain here, no matter what the Facebook group says. We talked for another 20 minutes. Robert explained that there was a growing faction of homeowners who thought the HOA was overreaching, who understood that fighting this was pointless and expensive. He'd been trying to organize a recall vote for Karen's position, but HOA bylaws made it difficult. "She's been president for 6 years, Robert said. "She runs the association like her personal fiefdom. This drilling situation has just given her another platform to exercise control. Between you and me, I think she cares more about winning the fight than what's actually best for the neighborhood." That conversation gave me some perspective, but it didn't slow down Karen's campaign. 3 days before drilling was to begin, I received another certified letter. This time, the HOA was placing a lien on the mineral rights themselves, claiming that my activities had created a financial burden on the association, and that I owed compensation for decreased property values. Marcus nearly laughed when I showed him the letter. "This is beyond absurd. You can't place a lien on property you don't own for damages that haven't occurred and might never occur. I'll file a response, but honestly, this is getting into harassment territory. We might need to consider a countersuit." The day before drilling was scheduled to start, I couldn't focus on work at all. I kept checking my email and phone, expecting some last-minute legal surprise. At 4 in the afternoon, Marcus called. "They filed an emergency appeal," he said. "Trying to get a different judge to issue a temporary restraining order. The hearing is tomorrow morning at 8. The same time drilling is supposed to start." "Exactly. They're hoping a judge will pause everything while the appeal is heard, which could take weeks. It's a delay tactic. Will it work? Unlikely. Judge Nguyen's ruling was sound and we have all our permits, but we need to be at that courthouse at 8 tomorrow morning just in case. I barely slept that night. I kept imagining scenarios where everything fell apart, where some legal technicality gave the HOA the victory they wanted, where I lost the opportunity that could pay off my student loans and give me actual financial security for the first time in my adult life. The hearing the next morning was even more contentious than the first. The HOA had brought the same crowd, plus local news cameras outside the courthouse. Their lawyer argued that new evidence had emerged suggesting the drilling could contaminate the neighborhood's water supply, that Titan Energy had violations at other sites, that the rushed timeline suggested improper procedures. Marcus systematically destroyed each argument. The water contamination claims were based on a debunked study from a completely different type of drilling. The supposed violations at other sites were minor paperwork issues that had been resolved. The timeline was standard for this type of operation. He presented affidavits from state environmental officials confirming that every regulation had been satisfied. This judge, a man named Thomas Morrison, seemed less patient than Judge Nguyen. "Counsel, I've reviewed the previous ruling and your appeal. I see no basis for overturning Judge Nguyen's decision. The law is clear, the permits are in order, and this appears to be an attempt to relitigate a matter that's already been decided. Your emergency appeal is denied." Karen Stromberg looked like she wanted to explode. As we filed out of the courtroom, she pushed through the crowd and got right in my face. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You're going to regret this." A bailiff intervened before things could escalate, but her words rattled me. There was something in her eyes that went beyond anger about property values or neighborhood character. This had become personal for her, a crusade she couldn't afford to lose. I drove straight from the courthouse to the drilling site. It was 7:30 in the morning, and the massive drill rig had arrived overnight. It towered over the site like a metal giant, workers swarming around its base making final preparations. Patricia Lopez spotted me and waved me over. "We're on schedule," she said. "We'll start drilling at noon." Wanted to give the morning traffic time to clear so we're not adding to congestion. "The HOA lost their emergency appeal," I told her. "Good. Listen, Derek, I want you to know we're taking security seriously. We've had situations before where opponents of drilling have tried to interfere with operations. We've got guards posted 24/7, and local police have been notified to keep an eye out. If anyone from the HOA tries anything stupid, we'll handle it." I spent the morning at the site, watching the preparation work. At 11:30, a small crowd started gathering on the street outside the fence. Residents from Willow Creek Estates, some holding signs that said "Stop the drilling" and "Protect our neighborhood." Karen Stromberg was there with a megaphone. At exactly noon, the drill bit started turning. The sound was noticeable but not overwhelming, a steady mechanical hum that the sound barriers dampened significantly. Patricia had been right about the noise levels. Karen started chanting through her megaphone, "Shut it down! Shut it down!" A couple dozen residents joined in, but their protest felt half-hearted. Most people were at work on a Thursday afternoon. The local news showed up and filmed for about 20 minutes before leaving. By 2 o'clock, the crowd had dwindled to just Karen and 3 other die-hard protesters. The drilling continued without incident for 3 days. I visited the site each evening after work, watching the progress reports and meeting with Patricia. Everything was going exactly according to plan. They drilled down 4,000 feet and were preparing to angle the drill bit horizontally. Then, on the 4th night, someone cut the power to the site. Patricia called me at 2 in the morning. We've got a problem. Someone broke into the electrical junction box and severed the main power line. The backup generators kicked in, so we didn't lose the whole, but this was deliberate sabotage. You know who did it? Security footage shows two people in dark clothing around midnight. They knew exactly where to cut. Police are on site now taking a report. I drove out there immediately. Police cars with flashing lights filled the entrance to the drilling site, and officers were interviewing the security guards. A detective named Martinez took my statement, asking questions about who might want to stop the drilling. I mean, half the neighborhood is angry about this, I said, but I don't know who would actually commit a crime. We'll review the footage and see if we can identify the suspects. In the meantime, we're treating this as criminal mischief, possibly escalating to sabotage given that this is an industrial operation. If someone had been hurt because of that power loss, we'd be looking at more serious charges. The power company came out at dawn and repaired the damage. Drilling resumed by 8 in the morning, but the mood at the site had changed. Workers were nervous, looking over their shoulders. Patricia doubled the security presence and installed additional cameras. The police identified the saboteurs within 48 hours. The security footage, enhanced by technicians, showed two figures whose builds and mannerisms matched video from the HOA's own Facebook page. One was Karen Stromberg. The other was her husband, Michael Stromberg, who'd been at several of the protests. Detective Martinez called me with the news. We've got enough for charges: criminal mischief, trespassing, and because it was an industrial site with safety implications, we're adding reckless endangerment. The DA is reviewing it now, but I expect warrants will be issued by tomorrow. This is going to get messy, I said. It already is messy. But people can't just take the law into their own hands because they're upset. Actions have consequences. The police arrested Karen and Michael Stromberg at their home the following evening. It made the local news again, this time with dramatically different optics. The story shifted from big bad oil company versus concerned homeowners to HOA president arrested for sabotage. The coverage included details about the cut power lines, the potential danger to workers, and the fact that Karen had been explicitly warned multiple times that the drilling was legal. The Willow Creek Estates HOA held an emergency board meeting the next day. Robert Chen called me with an update. Karen resigned as president. The board voted unanimously to accept her resignation and drop all legal action against you and Titan Energy. We're cutting our losses. The legal bills are already over $60,000, and now the association could be liable if you decided to sue for the harassment. I don't want to sue anyone, I said. I just want this to be over. It basically is. Karen's out. We're out of your way. And most residents have accepted that the drilling is happening whether they like it or not. There's a new president now, a guy named Frank Martinez. He's talking about negotiating that community benefit package Titan Energy mentioned. I met with Frank and two other board members a week later. They were professional and cordial, a stark contrast to Karen's hostility. We discussed what Titan Energy could do to offset the impact of drilling operations. The final agreement included $50,000 for neighborhood improvements, which the HOA voted to spend on a new playground and resurfacing the community pool. Titan Energy also agreed to pay for quarterly water quality testing for the next 5 years, and established a hotline for residents to report any concerns about the drilling operations. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. Karen Stromberg pled guilty to criminal mischief and reckless endangerment as part of a plea deal. She received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution to Titan Energy for the damaged equipment and lost operational time. Her husband, Michael, got a similar sentence. The drilling continued for 6 weeks total. They hit the target formation at the projected depth and angled the drill horizontally, exactly as planned. The initial well tests were excellent, showing even more natural gas reserves than the original surveys had predicted. Patricia called me when they began extraction and said my royalty checks would start arriving within 90 days. The first check came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3.5 months after drilling had started. I opened the envelope with shaking hands and stared at the number, $47,000, just the first payment. Patricia had explained that production was ramping up, and I could expect similar checks quarterly for years to come. I sat in my apartment holding that check, thinking about everything that had happened. The hostile HOA meetings, the legal battles, the threats and harassment, the sabotage and arrests. It had been the most stressful 4 months of my life. But I'd stood my ground, defended my legal rights, and now I was looking at financial security I'd never imagined having. More than that, I'd learned something about how people react when they feel threatened or powerless. Karen Stromberg hadn't been evil, just desperate to control a situation that was beyond her control. She'd made terrible decisions, broken laws, and paid a price for it, but I could almost understand the fear that had driven her to that point. Almost, but not quite. Because at the end of the day, I'd done everything legally. I'd followed every rule, obtained every permit, and tried to be reasonable even when facing unreasonable opposition. The system had worked the way it was supposed to work, and that mattered. I deposited the check and paid off half my student loans in one transaction. It felt surreal watching that balance drop by $25,000. For the first time since graduating college, I could actually imagine being debt-free, maybe even buying my own house someday. The drilling site at Willow Creek Estates gradually became just part of the landscape. The loud construction phase was over, replaced by quiet maintenance operations that barely registered to the neighborhood. Life went on. Kids played in yards, people walked dogs. The new playground funded by Titan Energy became the most popular spot in the community. Robert Chen invited me to a neighborhood barbecue 6 months after drilling had started. I was nervous about accepting, wondering if I'd face hostility from residents who still blamed me for the disruption. But he insisted, and I figured I owed it to the reasonable people in the neighborhood to show my face. The barbecue was held at the community center, and about 50 residents showed up. I got a few cold stares, but most people were friendly or at least polite. Several thanked me for the community improvements that Titan Energy had funded. A few wanted to know details about the drilling process and seemed genuinely interested in the technology. Frank Martinez, the new HOA president, pulled me aside at one point. I want to apologize for how things went down initially. Karen was out of control and the board should have reined her in sooner. We let the situation escalate way beyond what it needed to be. It wasn't your fault, I said, and it worked out in the end. Still, it was a mess. But I think we've learned some lessons about how to handle unexpected situations. And for what it's worth, the quarterly water testing has all come back clean. No contamination, no issues. I'm telling everyone that was worried. I left that barbecue feeling something I hadn't expected. Acceptance. Not from everyone, certainly, but from enough people that I no longer felt like the neighborhood villain. I was just a guy who'd inherited something valuable and made a choice to capitalize on it, which was about as American as it gets. The royalty checks kept coming, every 3 months like clockwork. After the first year, I'd made over $200,000 in royalties alone. I paid off all my student loans, bought a decent car to replace my aging Honda, and started seriously looking at houses. The money was enough that I could actually afford something in a good neighborhood, maybe even Willow Creek Estates if I wanted the irony. I didn't want the irony. I bought a house in McKinney, about 20 minutes from my office, a nice 3-bedroom place with a backyard and a 2-car garage. It felt strange going from renting a cramped apartment to actually owning property, having space and permanence and the ability to paint walls whatever color I wanted. Uncle Howard had given me more than just mineral rights. He'd given me a crash course in standing up for myself, in navigating complex situations with money and emotion and law all tangled together. I wished I'd known him better, wished I could thank him for changing my life in ways he probably never imagined. Titan Energy kept drilling new wells on the same property, each one tapping into different sections of the formation. My royalty percentages applied to all of them, and the checks grew larger. By the end of the second year, I'd made close to $500,000. It was more money than I'd ever thought I'd have, generational wealth building before my eyes. The situation at Willow Creek Estates had become a case study, apparently. Marcus Brennan called me one day to say that law schools were teaching about the case in property law classes, using it as an example of split estates and mineral rights conflicts in residential areas. The story of the HOA president who'd resorted to sabotage was particularly popular as a cautionary tale about taking matters into your own hands. Karen Stromer completed her probation and community service. I heard through Robert Chen that she and her husband had moved away from Willow Creek Estates, selling their house and relocating somewhere in Oklahoma. I didn't wish her ill. She'd made mistakes, paid for them, and hopefully learned something in the process. 3 years after that first meeting in Mr. Patterson's office, I went back to visit him. He was the one who'd started all of this, handing me those documents and explaining that I'd inherited something valuable. I wanted him to see what had come of it. "You've done well," he said, reviewing the financial statements I'd brought. "Your uncle would be proud. He knew the value of mineral rights, spent his whole life acquiring them. He'd be happy to know they ended up with family and that you had the backbone to see it through." It wasn't easy, I admitted. There were times I wanted to just walk away, sell the rights, and avoid all the conflict. But you didn't. That takes character. A lot of people would have folded under that kind of pressure, especially the social pressure and public criticism. You stood firm on your rights and navigated a difficult situation with integrity. I left his office feeling validated in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The whole experience had been transformative, taking me from a guy just trying to make rent to someone with actual wealth and financial security. But more than the money, it had proven to myself that I could handle adversity, that I could make tough decisions, and see them through even when everything felt like it was falling apart. The drilling operations at Willow Creek Estates continued for years. Titan Energy estimated the wells would produce for at least 15 to 20 years, possibly longer. My royalty checks became a reliable source of income on top of my software engineering salary. I was able to invest, save, and build a financial foundation I'd never dreamed possible. I drove past Willow Creek Estates occasionally, just to see how things looked. The drilling site had been cleaned up and consolidated, reduced to a small maintenance facility that was barely visible from the street. The neighborhood looked peaceful, prosperous, unchanged despite all the drama that had happened there. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I just said no to Titan Energy, if I'd walked away from the mineral rights and avoided all the conflict. I'd have kept my quiet life, stayed in my apartment, continued grinding away at my job and my debt. It would have been easier, certainly less stressful, but I wouldn't have grown. I wouldn't have learned what I was capable of when pushed, wouldn't have discovered that I could stand up to hostility and intimidation and come out the other side stronger. The money was life-changing, but the experience was character-building in ways that mattered just as much. 5 years after inheriting those mineral rights, I was a different person. More confident, more financially secure, more aware of how the world works and how to navigate complex situations involving law and money and human emotion. Uncle Howard's unexpected gift had been more than just valuable property. It had been an education and a proving ground rolled into one. I never did move to Willow Creek Estates, but I stayed in touch with Robert Chen and Frank Martinez. They'd occasionally update me on neighborhood news, and I'd share information about the drilling operations when residents had questions. The relationship between the community and Titan Energy had evolved into something almost cooperative, with regular communication and mutual respect replacing the early hostility. The wells kept producing, the checks kept arriving, and life went on. I met someone, a woman named Sarah who worked in finance and understood mineral rights better than most people. We talked about my experience on our third date, and she was fascinated rather than judgmental. 2 years later, we got married in a ceremony that felt impossibly far removed from those tense HOA meetings and courthouse battles. We bought a bigger house, started talking about kids, made plans for a future built on the foundation that Uncle Howard's inheritance had provided. The mineral rights would keep generating income for decades, creating generational wealth that I could pass on to my own children someday, teaching them about property rights and standing firm in the face of opposition. The story of the Willow Creek Estates drilling became something I told at parties, a dramatic tale with legal battles and sabotage and vindication. People were always surprised at how heated it had gotten, how a simple matter of property law had escalated into arrests and criminal charges. But anyone who'd ever dealt with an HOA understood immediately. There was something about homeowners' associations that brought out territorial instincts and power struggles, turning minor disputes into full-blown wars. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that inheriting those mineral rights was one of the best things that ever happened to me, despite all the stress and conflict it caused. It forced me to grow up in ways I wouldn't have otherwise, to learn about law and business and human nature all at once. It gave me financial security that changed the trajectory of my entire life. And it taught me the most important lesson of all. When you know you're right, when you've followed all the rules and done everything properly, you have to be willing to stand your ground even when it's uncomfortable. Even when people are angry, when they're threatening you, when they're making you out to be the villain. Because sometimes doing the right thing for yourself means weathering a storm, and the only way through is forward. The drilling platform at Willow Creek Estates still operates today, quietly extracting natural gas from deep beneath a suburban neighborhood in Collin County, Texas. Kids ride bikes past the facility without giving it a second thought. Property values in the neighborhood have actually increased over the years, proving that all the dire predictions about destroyed home values were unfounded. And somewhere in Oklahoma, I hope Karen Stromberg found peace with what happened, that she learned from her mistakes and moved on to a life where she didn't feel the need to control everything around her. Her story ended with consequences, but not with destruction, and maybe that's all anyone can ask for when they make serious mistakes. As for me, I check my mailbox every quarter waiting for that envelope from Titan Energy, still feeling a small thrill when I see the amount. The numbers have become familiar now, expected rather than shocking, but they never stop representing what Uncle Howard gave me. Not just money, but opportunity and challenge and growth all wrapped together. I inherited mineral rights under an HOA neighborhood, drilling started, and it changed everything. Not just my bank account, but my entire perspective on what I'm capable of handling, what I'm willing to fight for, and who I am when tested. That's worth more than any royalty check, even the really big ones.